All right, then we've started, and Ronald, you can let everybody in, and looking forward to start. And Helena, feel free to start.
Okay, so we can start. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this conference on the future of European rail and what to expect from the European Union and member states. This is Elena Fortea speaking from EcoUnion, a think and do tank based in Barcelona that works on sustainability policies. I'm also speaking on behalf of Europe on Rail, a European initiative led by civil society organizations to reduce carbon emissions from international mobility by promoting night and day passenger trains between European countries. And we believe today's conference to be meaningful and important due to the current context of multiple crises. And also because, as we all know, transport represents the 30% of CO2 emissions, and this number is still rising. And also considering rail is a really efficient mode of transport and also a quick solution to decarbonize mobility. We would like to thank you all for joining us today, especially our prominent speakers that will take the floor during the conference. And we are happy to count on the participation of European Union Commission and European Union Parliament representatives, as well as relevant actors of the rail sector. I will now pass the floor to one of our keynote speakers, Daniel Mess, member of Cabinet for Transport of the Vice President of the European Commission for the European Green Deal.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I hope that everybody can hear me. That's always the exciting moment. No, thanks a lot for this invitation, and actually for this very timely conference. As you already said before, this is a world in a European continent in turmoil. One cannot even start listing everything that is putting us really in crisis mode, a war situation that is causing an energy crisis, and then it is so essential to keep on talking about indeed these energy efficient, clean transport solutions that we already have. Already in the current context at the European Commission, we of course encourage as many people as possible who are willing to save energy to take public transport, and that of course includes the train. But also going forward, we all know that the war has triggered us to move to clean energy quicker. But even in that world, we need to keep thinking about energy efficiency, also when we move people around. So rail was already the backbone of the European Green Deal in transport and will remain so, also going forward. So that's already a first message to give. And then international passenger rail is especially important to us, because of course we want to make it so attractive that people could consider not flying, but actually taking the train to travel around across the continent. It is a fun way to travel around. You can see many things when you look at the window, and we want to stimulate that. Now for that, a lot still needs to be done. We need to be honest about that. We need to do a lot of work to make rail this default attractive transport mode on our continent. Some of our plans are already quite known. Very ambitious proposals on transport infrastructure to make sure that international trains also run quicker between capitals, concrete pilot projects to make these services quicker and more convenient as soon as possible. But I want to focus in on one area in particular, because I know it's on the top of the many minds here, and that is ticketing. I think that everybody is aware of the crucial importance of this topic, because you can invest in rail as much as you want. But if people can't find the tickets easily, and if the tickets are not attractively priced, we will not meet the challenge of making rail as attractive as we wanted. So ticketing is an absolute priority, also for my boss, not only for Commissioner Vallon and DG Move, but also for Executive Vice President Timmermans. I think that his comments have been widely reported that he thinks this is an urgent issue. An issue where he really wants to be a bit less patient and really wants to see action. He really wants this European Commission to deliver on a proposal that makes ticketing attractive. We must achieve the goal that a train ticket is as easy to find as a plane ticket, and also that the train ticket can be combined with the ticket on other transport modes. Because if you look at the passenger side, we all need to go back to what the passenger wants. The passenger wants door-to-door travel. So ideally, multimodal tickets. Now, he has made this comment that we want, by the end of this year, to decide how we move forward on this question. And I want to, on his behalf, put his comments into context. Many people have asked after his statement, I want to decide this by the end of this year. Does it mean that he refers to the multimodal ticketing initiative that DG Move is working on? And I can confirm today, yes, that was what he was referring to, the multimodal ticketing initiative to make this more attractive. We invest a lot, also as governments already in rail. And when it comes to ticketing, we need to go for the solutions that are as cost effective as possible and make sure that the offer, the competitive offer of tickets is attractive as possible. So the train can really compete with the low prices on air travel. So this is talking about access to data, access to essential elements that makes it possible for as many ticket vendors as possible to come in, as many services as possible to come in and be visible, so that the passenger, who needs to be absolutely at the heart of this, gets an attractive and competitive offer. That is the direction that we are now, that my boss is now currently thinking of. And Christian Schmidt is on this conference as well, and can definitely, I think, compliment on this, but I want to put that into context. That is what we are really thinking of, so that we finally move to this situation where we can say, we've done this. We come with a proposal to make these tickets easy to find and combined with these other transport modes. For me, in my humble view, you know, we love roaming as a policy. We love the European policy that we can go abroad on our mobile and just have the tariffs that we have when we are at home. And this ticketing, rail ticketing, can be the roaming of transport. So this is, for my boss, also an important project, because he knows how much citizens are waiting for this and how good this policy can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel Mess, for giving us your view and the European Commission's view. I will now pass the floor to John Worth, founder of Trains for Europe and cross-European train traveler.
Let me just share the screen. Right, that should all be working. Thank you very much indeed. And that was a very interesting introduction by Daniel Mess there, because I'm going to talk about some of those dynamics as well, and some of the problems that I encountered, which are perhaps even more fundamental than the ticketing problems that I've been discovering through the work that I've been doing. You should see on the screen there my presentation. I'm the founder of a small initiative called Trains for Europe, which has been working to solve the issues of the absence of night trains in Europe over the last year and a half or so. And I conducted a project which kind of sort of took the temperature of the problems of European rail this summer as well. And I'm going to speak about some of those very practical problems from on the ground. What's the essential issue? National railway systems in Europe work comparatively well, but once you cross a border on a train, everything becomes more complicated. Infrastructure, service levels, ticketing, timetables, all of them are poorer quality or more difficult the moment you cross a border on a train. And then where it's not a European country, a EU country, sorry, but Norway, for example, had no international trains for 15 months during COVID, while at the time, buses and planes and cars ran perfectly well. If we're to strengthen European railways, we can't have the situation that the cross-border service is the first thing to be removed the moment there's any sign of disruption. What are the two different things that I've been working on? This longer term campaign I've been working on, this campaign Trains for Europe, has been the demand that the European Union needs to help organize the procurement of a fleet of new night trains. As organizing a fleet of new night trains, if we want to have very long distance train services in Europe, is an urgent and important problem to fix. More about that in just a second. And the second was this project this summer, Cross-Border Rail, where I crossed every internal border of the European Union that you can cross by train. That was 95 borders and 30,000 kilometers by train to investigate the problems and the difficulties on the ground. First of all, on the night train problem, the European Union, indeed DG Move of the Commission, has itself acknowledged, and this is a map from the DG Move's Cross-Border Rail Action Plan that came out in December last year. Numerous studies have indicated that there is an untapped demand for new night train routes. Those orange lines there on the map are the routes that DG Move's report indicated would be possible night train routes which could run in Europe over and above the routes which are currently available. The problem is that night trains were out of fashion in the 1990s and the early 2000s, and old carriages were not replaced at that stage. That was a kind of era of cheap flights, the era of Ryanair, and many of those old trains were scrapped. The problem is that other than the Austrian Railways, ÖBB, no company has ordered any new night trains since then. And without political action from the European Union, this problem is probably not going to get fixed. Also in December of last year, at the same time as the Commission released its cross-border rail action plan, the European Investment Bank launched its Green Rail Investment Platform. But so far as I'm aware, there are no orders of new night trains that have been forthcoming as a result of that. Perhaps it's still too soon or too early. The important point here, and again, I'm happy to answer questions or do follow-up on this, is essentially that if you wish to manage train distances which are longer than 6 hours by daytime train, most passengers won't spend more than 6 hours in a daytime train. They might save a night in a hotel if you can put those journeys overnight. And so therefore, that's been one of the focuses of my work, has been to say, is there a way and means of scaling up this number of night trains? And before you can scale up the number of night trains in Europe, there is one core question. Someone has to buy and build some new trains. And at the moment, other than the Austrian Railways, the big exception, no one is doing that. So if the European Union, to Christian Schmidt, Daniel Mess, or others from EU institutions that are here, if you want to solve the night train problem, the European Union probably needs to be more engaged and more active on that individual point. What about the cross-border rail project? A few words about that, and then I'll come to a close. I wanted to basically say, okay, what's the state of the problems in European rail, and go and investigate these problems on the ground. So I went everywhere, crossed every border in the European Union you can cross by train, and in the places it didn't work, I took a bicycle with me to cross the borders. And there are many places in Europe where there used to be cross-border tracks, but they've fallen into disrepair. And there are some campaigning groups that wish to reopen them, but I'm not going to focus on those because they're more complicated. The points 2, 3, and 4 on my screen there are the most interesting ones, I think, for the conference here today. There are places where there are tracks that exist, but no passenger trains run. So one important, perhaps, for Frans Timmermans is the cross-border line between Haarmont in Belgium and Weert in the Netherlands, where Belgium wishes to reopen that cross-border line, but Netherlands is refusing. That might be one that he could raise with former colleagues in Dutch politics. There are places where timetables run and trains run, but timetables are poor. There are then also a series of information and ticketing problems which make cross-border rail very complicated. And this is a point which builds again upon what Daniel Mess was saying. So just an example of each of those different ones, places where tracks exist but trains don't run. So this is the cross-border region of Latvia and Lithuania next to Daugavpils, the second largest city of Latvia. If you that grey line there on the map is a place where trains don't run, and I had to take a bicycle in order to cross the border there. And indeed, that was then a picture taken when crossing the border. Now, if this is the only way at the moment to get to that border crossing, if you want a public transport option, it is to take a bus to Zemgale, the final village on the Latvian side. And out of that bus, indeed, got people who crossed the border 2 kilometers on foot to then take the train on the Lithuanian side. So that is the border station of Turmantas, a village of 286 inhabitants, which has 5 daily trains a day to Vilnius. 20 kilometers further, but in Latvia, is Daugavpils, a city of 80,000 people, which has no trains at the moment from Vilnius. The train, the red and silver train there that you can see in the picture, is parked up for 4 hours at the border station with the staff in it, and doesn't do the 20 kilometers further as far as Daugavpils, the first city in Latvia. The train is approved to run in Latvia. There are staff to run it in Latvia. The only thing that is missing is a tank of diesel fuel in order to manage to run it as far as Daugavpils. But neither Lithuania nor Latvia can manage to get their act together in order to manage to run that train 20 kilometers further to offer a train connection between the first city of Lithuania, Vilnius, and the second city of Latvia, Daugavpils. That is the level of the absurdity and the stupidity of European railways. You have an active line, but you can't find a tank of diesel fuel and the finance for that to manage to connect up those two cities. That type of example, that type of problem exists all over the place in the EU. So that's the first, tracks which exist, but trains don't run. The second is places where trains run, but no one has thought to coordinate the timetables to offer a reasonable cross-border connection. So this is the cross-border connection between Nice and Ventimiglia through Monaco. I unfortunately personally couldn't take this actual train myself because I was stuck due to a French train strike, but that's a different problem. If you want to take the train, for example, from Marseille to Genova, you would depart at 7:57 in the morning from Marseille to Nice, right? Gets you to Nice at 10:41. But unfortunately, you miss that train at 10:36 from Nice to Ventimiglia. You miss that train by 5 minutes. Okay, maybe it's not too bad. The next train comes along 25 minutes later. So you take the train at 11:06. Doesn't look too bad, all right? But the problem then comes when you get to Ventimiglia to then take the train from Ventimiglia to Genova. You miss the train at 11:57 by 4 minutes, and the next one is 1 hour and 56 minutes later. So your ultimate trip time, if you want to go from Marseille to Genova, is almost 2 hours longer than it should be, because the railway companies on both sides, or the local administrations on both sides of the border, did not think to coordinate those timetables. Now, I raised this point with the head of regional travel of Trenitalia during my project this summer, and she was not aware of that difficulty and that problem. These types of timetable coordination problems exist all over Europe. And even if the timetables work, can you even actually get the data? Now, this is before Frans Timmermans even comes to the problem of solving cross-border ticketing. Half the time, or in some member states of the European Union, we don't even know which trains even run. It is more fundamental. So three cross-border lines, between France and Spain have data problems to even work out which trains run. Those are the borders Port-Beau to Cerbère, Puigcerd to La Tour de Carol, and Hendaye to Irun. And I'm only going to talk about the number 3 there, the one over on the Atlantic coast. Now, if you put a connection like Bordeaux to Bilbao into an international travel planner like Deutsche Bahn's Reiseauskunft, it tells you there are no connections, right? In reality, there are lots of connections at that border. In fact, quite a lot of them, right? They are run by Euskotren, a local railway provider owned by the Basque government that runs a cross-border train between Hendaye and Irun every half an hour. The problem is that data is not uploaded to the international timetable database called UIC Merits, run by the Union Internationale des Chemins de Fer in Paris. So unfortunately, Daniel, for your point with regard to ticketing, there are numerous problems all over European railways that before you even come to ticketing, you don't even know which trains are even running. All national trains in Croatia are not in the international timetable databases. All national trains in Estonia, a bunch of regional trains in Spain, a bunch of regional trains in Romania, some private operators in Czechia. So before you even come to the issue of how you book a through ticket, you don't even half the time even know which trains are even operating, because there's not even a full and complete European rail timetable. So that should be something that ought to legitimately be addressed also by DG Move, hopefully in multimodal ticketing. Now, I'm steadily working through these problems with the EU Agency for Railways to try to find ways and means of making sure that before we even come to ticketing, we even know which trains are actually running. And last but not least, there was one ticketing one, which is particularly absurd because it impacts Strasbourg to get to the seat of the European Parliament. And that's the cross-border train from Offenburg to Strasbourg, which is also a cross-border rail absurdity. It's a diesel train that runs under an electrified line. But anyway, if from where I live normally in Berlin, I put Berlin-Strasbourg into the website of Deutsche Bahn, it gives me a ticket price of €166.50 for a single ticket. But if I want to book from Berlin to Kiel, which is just 9 kilometers from Strasbourg, Deutsche Bahn will give me a ticket price of €68.90. And then in the train itself, I can buy Kiel to Strasbourg for €4.30. So if I put the two parts together and I know the trick, I can get from Berlin to Strasbourg for less than half the ticket price than Deutsche Bahn will offer me. Now, that's because there are many gremlins and problems in the ticketing systems Europe-wide. That is basically, without going into all of the technicalities of it, because Deutsche Bahn can't sell me what it calls an Europasparpreis, a European Sparpreis, involving the local train in Baden-Württemberg. So in order to manage to solve those ticketing problems in the multimodal ticketing regulation, you're going to have to find ways and means of ironing out some of those sorts of pricing and ticketing absurdities as well. And you might find communities of people online who might help highlight many more of those types of difficulties and those types of problems. I contacted Baden-Württemberg's Public Transport Authority and said, you've got this problem with your tariff to get to Strasbourg. And they said, we know. And I said, well, what are you going to do about it? And I didn't get an answer. Right, just to conclude, that's all the places that I went. So if you have any interest in any of those borders, all that is on the website. And out of that came a top 20 projects for the European Union to fix, crossborderrail.trainsforeurope.eu/top20, where you can find the details of all of those different places, which impact 19 European Union member states based on my research. What are the demands? The European Commission has to get its hands dirty and deal with these problems on the ground. The European Union has largely said, we will set the framework for what European rail needs to look like, but these sorts of things are not working on the ground. There should not be problems like Turmantas to Daugavpils, because the framework is there in order to manage to make Latvia and Lithuania collaborate, but they're not. So the question has to be, how do you manage to solve those problems in practice? The main means of doing that, or the three main points: organize the procurement for a fleet of night trains. Second, work out exactly where the problems are. Now, I would advocate that the European Commission should publish an annual cross-border rail index. That would show where the problems are. Where is this getting worse? And where is this getting better? Where are the places where cross-border routes have fallen away, right? It is Belgium to France, where in December this year, a cross-border passenger rail connection will get cancelled. There are currently trains between Mons in France and Aulnoy in Belgium, and from December the 11th of this year, they will no longer run. Now that should be one where the European Commission is saying, hey, Belgium and France, you get a red mark here in the index because that cross-border railway line then got cancelled, right? Whereas actually the good news from this year was Hungary to Slovakia, where they stepped up their connection, right? And therefore proactively sit down with railway companies and national and regional governments to work through the specific issues at each border. When a train is not running, what are the real reasons why that is so? Is it infrastructure? Is it finance? Is it ticketing? Is it staff? Is it rolling stock? What is the actual problem? Because if you're one of those passengers taking that bus at Turmantas to Daugavpils, you don't have that lever, you don't have that power yourselves in order to manage to do that. So those are three concrete proposals I would make to say these are the sorts of things that the European Commission should ideally be looking to fix. So that is all from me, from what I've learned through these various projects over the course of the summer. I'm happy to do any follow-up questions. Likewise, you can follow me on Twitter, send me a message, or likewise, download the slides and the materials on the link that you can see on the screen. And I'll put that also in the chat.
Great. Thank you very much, John Ward, for your interesting remarks on the different European cross-border connections, also on ticketing problems, and they have been really illustrative. Now I will pass the floor to Mr. Jacob Dalunde, member of the Transport Committee of the European Parliament, who was on a vote, but who can finally join us. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you. So, from my opinion, there is no chance that we will solve the climate crisis without fundamentally shifting the way we think about transportation. It is the one area where emissions still are increasing, even though many years have passed since the Paris Agreement. Emissions from the transport sector are still increasing. So we need a fundamental shift in inherently unsustainable modes of transportation, such as road and aviation, to fundamentally sustainable modes of transportation, such as railways and to some extent shipping. And what stands in the way of this? Of course, there are many individual technical decisions in regulation, in pricing, in infrastructure investments. But the big shift that we need is in our minds, because I feel I'm very much in a minority as a politician who think that railway is not something that is only there for regional and national transportation. Most of my colleagues in the parliament, when they think going from one country to another, they generally think aviation. And our problem is that the very same mindset exists in most of our authorities, because most of the regulating power for the railways are still on the national level. And in their mindset, when they look at signaling, when they look at investments, when they look at type approval, I can go on and on and on. The mindset is national. And the sad thing is that the same mindset problem still exists in too many railway companies, for whom the big lion's share of the business is the domestic travel. And then for most railway companies, cross-border travel, it's a nicety that you do a little bit on the side. And all these actors, politicians, authorities, and railway companies, you need a mind shift to embrace the concept that in the future, for most railway companies, for politicians, and for authorities, it will be pretty much equal. The focus on domestic travel and cross-border travel when it comes to railways. And once you start that mind shift, I think many other things will follow. So what does need to follow? Well, it's three big things. It's the price for the tickets, it's the investments, and it's the regulation. So if you first look at the tickets, generally, if you're going a quite short distance, of course, railway is usually quite competitive in terms of price. But if you're going on a longer journey from, let's say, Stockholm to Brussels, a journey that I take quite often, as I live in Stockholm but work in Brussels, and I try to fly only when I really, really need it. So usually I go by train between Stockholm and Brussels. And it's quite a lot more expensive to use the train rather than the aviation. And I have the luxury of having the European Parliament pay for my journey, so it's not a financial discussion for me. But when my friends want to come visit me in Brussels, for them it's usually cheaper to go by aviation rather than by rail. And this cannot be, because if this continues to be the case, going by rail for environmental reasons will be a middle-class enterprise. And the poorer people will not be able to use the more sustainable mode of transportation. That is why aviation needs to pay for its environmental impact. And that will shift consumer behavior, yes, but it will also raise revenues, which take us to item number 2. Because even if we make the railways more competitive in terms of economics, we still have a lot of bottlenecks all over Europe, where we need more infrastructure in order to create more modal shift to railways. To take Sweden, for example, on most of our main lines, we are at capacity. Between Stockholm and Göteborg, between Stockholm and Malmö, between Malmö and Göteborg, it is very difficult to fit in any more trains. And we've recently launched a new night train between Stockholm and Hamburg, but Hamburg-Hauptbahnhof is at capacity. So that night train cannot stop at Hauptbahnhof. They have to stop at Hamburg-Altona instead. And there are similar situations all over Europe where we need more infrastructure. And that could be paid by making sure that both road transport and aviation and shipping pay for its environmental impact. That raises revenue to make sure that we can fund proper infrastructure. Both the bigger projects as the Fehmarn Belt connection between Copenhagen and Hamburg, but also all those smaller missing links that are usually forgotten. Especially since most national railway politicians tend to think primarily on constructing new railway and fixing missing links within the member states, but tend to forget fixing the missing links between the member states. And here we need more funding on the European level to make sure that we fund the construction of those missing links. But even if we fix the price difference between aviation and railway, and even if we build all this infrastructure, it's still far too difficult for most citizens to book a cross-border longer journey. And to continue with the Swedish example, one of Sweden's biggest Facebook groups is called Tågsemester, train vacation. It's 150,000 members. Given that Sweden is only 10 million people, that's a quite big percentage of all Swedish citizens who are in this Facebook group. And what do they talk about? It's not how do you travel affordably. The big question is, how the hell do you book the tickets? That is the main big issue, because so many of our railway operators want a direct consumer relationship with the customer. They don't want to sell their tickets fully to third-party vendors who can create an app or a website where you can search, I want to go from Uppsala and I want to go to Venice, and I want a cohesive journey, and I want to see all the alternatives. I want the correct prices. I want to compare taking the night train first or the hotel in Hamburg, or you want to compare all the differences. That is, of course, available for aviation, but it's not yet properly available for railway. Yes, we are making some headway. There are more and more railway companies who start to open up their booking systems. And there are some apps that are available, like Trainline, and Omeo, and All Aboard. It's starting to develop, but it's going far too slow. And too many of our European railway operators are dragging their feet in making their booking systems fully available to third-party vendors. And it's not only the problem of actually booking the ticket. There are some vendors who will, in theory, book you the ticket, but it will still, in practice, be several different tickets. Which means that if you take the Swedish operator from Uppsala to Copenhagen, and then the Danish operator from Copenhagen to Hamburg, and then either the German operator from Hamburg to München, or a night train from Hamburg to Salzburg or Innsbruck, if one of those legs delays you, in the next leg, you will not get a new ticket because it was another operator who created the delay. And since the ticket in practice actually was bought at separate tickets, yes, you might get some funding for the delay, but that might not necessarily cover booking the rest of the journey in its totality. And this is not such a big problem for me as a middle-class enthusiast for whom it's a bit of an adventure to get stranded in Hamburg or München or Paris, and to pay for a hotel night and book new tickets for the next day. It's manageable, but if you're a family with 3 children and you don't have the highest paying job, it's not financially and it's not socially that fun to get stranded there on the platform and realize that you have to find a hotel for that night and book an entirely new journey for the next day. So that is why we need not only full access to all the booking systems to book journeys with third-party vendors, you also need a cohesive, through ticketing, passenger rights, so that you know you will end up in your final destination without having to pay more money. So those are the 3 big issues: pricing, infrastructure, and regulation for ticketing as example. But there's so many other ticketing regulation issues that we also need to look at. The language for the locomotive operators, the signaling systems, the cohesive timetabling between member states. There are so many issues that we need to solve. But in order to solve any of them, it begins with a mindset shift. that railway is not only for regional and domestic travel, it is also for long distance cross-border. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jacob Dalunde, for pointing out these three main problems of the rail sector in Europe. In order to start with the panel discussion, I will now hand over to our moderator, Jacob Rom, from Germanwatch and coordinator of Europe on Rail.
Thank you, Helena, and thank you for the speakers. That was a very enlightening and very interesting topics covered, and I think a lot of a big to-do list for several of our players here on the panel. I'm looking forward to the discussion here. First, I would like to hear a bit from our panelists what their vision for the rail system is in, like, let's say 2035 or so. So an achievable time frame. But before we start into that, for you as the audience, you can also ask your questions in the Q&A function of the webinar, and feel free to put them in both to our keynote speakers or to our panelists, and we will do our best to include that into the discussion. Also to our speakers and panelists, if you see a question that's directed to you and you want to answer in the Q&A function directly, feel free to do so. So you can also have some interaction with our audience here. There's been a lot of input and also some calls on the European Commission to act, for example, as one of the players present here. And maybe to start out with you, Christian Schmidt. He's a deputy director for the land transport at the European Commission. And maybe let's give us a short insight. What is your vision for European rail in 2035? How will it look like then? And what are the two most important steps in the next, say, 2 years from now on that will have brought us there?
Thanks a lot, Jakob, and thank you to Europe on Rail for organizing this. And I listened carefully to the previous speakers, and I fully agree that things have to improve. I would say to Jacob Dalunde also that you said you feel that you're in a minority. Well, last week the Parliament adopted by consensus in the Tran Committee a very good report that responds to the Commission's action plan on long-distance passenger rail. And I think in that report, for which I'd like to congratulate the Parliament, you actually do set out a vision for how things should improve. So I'd encourage anyone to go and look at the report adopted by the Parliament, giving support to this vision for significant improvements. I won't go into the details on ticketing because Daniel Mes has already confirmed that this is a top priority for the Commission. But everybody who spoke about, if you can't find it, you can't write it. I mean, that obviously is a problem. So let me just reconfirm, we are working on an ambitious proposal for ticketing for next year, multimodal. But let me also say that this is not just a technical issue. And John's examples of, you can't find them because they are hidden in various websites or not made available. Again, and John knows, this is not a technical issue. There are reasons for this, where there are commercial interests standing in the way for making this available and combinable. And that's why we are moving towards proposing a legislative proposal to address this. But so on ticketing, we're working on it and we'll come forward with it soon. Jakob, I wanted to just mention two issues, and then I'll come to the night train issue where we were called to run a pool of rolling stock. But next year, two things have to change. One is the problem of uncoordinated timetables across the member states and the way that things break at the border. The reason for that is that the way timetables are set in member states is manual, annual, and national. It is a system that is domestic, prioritizes passenger rail, and at the border penalizes and always leaves last the cross-border connections and freight. We haven't talked about freight at all, but that is even worse because you get these trains running up to the border and then not having a reasonable slot for traveling. And as you know, freight is only profitable if it is cross-border and long distance. So next year we will come forward with a legislative proposal, again, on revising the way we coordinate these timetables across Europe. Instead of manual, annual, and national, it has to become European, digital, and flexible. The other thing I wanted to just touch on is the question of night trains. I agree that there is an untapped potential, but I'm not sure the solution is that the Commission, DG Move, and my small staff of 50 people working on rail here becomes train managers of a rolling stock in Europe. I can also throw in an anecdote here. When I last took a night train from Brussels to Vienna, there was a piece of rolling stock and it was fine. I didn't manage to get one of the best compartments, so it was an Encruchette, but it was fine. It was fine, and it wasn't too expensive. My problem with that was, first of all, the train stopped in Aachen and changed locomotive. And you had, of course, some very courageous lady going in between the trains, changing the couplers, docking in under the buffers, and do the change of locomotives as one has been doing it for 100 years. And then when I wanted to go back from Vienna, then the frequency wasn't there, the timetable didn't fit, and I had to fly back. So the problem of night train is to address the fundamental conditions that make the operations niche, too expensive, and not frequently enough. So great believer in night train, but I'm not sure the essential problem here is rolling stock. It is true that it has sort of been neglected for decades because it's been taken over by day high-speed trains and by discount aviation. But we believe here that by addressing these obstacles, the market will deliver some of these back. If I'm wrong on that, then we certainly will continue to push the European Investment Bank to extend offers for loans and financing. This is covered by our action plan, and any operators who seek this should go there. The last thing I wanted to talk about, Jakob, because you asked about vision for 2025.
I did, in fact, yeah. Christian, get to that. I'm curious on that.
Yes, well, vision for 2025 is a single European railway area that isn't just on paper and in legislation, but is truly integrated. And that will only be possible when we have rolling stock that can go everywhere. We haven't spoken about the strategic role of the European Railway Agency, but I'm looking for a future where a piece of equipment, and I know Philippe Citroën from Unife is speaking after me, where we have standardized rolling stock that can go everywhere, because many of the obstacles that John met on his journey are also the fact that simply the technical specifications of each piece of rolling stock can't cross the borders and is not certified to roll across those borders. Here, we simply have to stop talking about interoperability and start talking about harmonization. And of course, here, the Commission has a role to set the technical specifications. We need to be ambitious. There are transition costs, as always, but the long-term vision, Jakob, has to be that if you produce a piece of rolling stock for one market, it is good for all 27 member states. When all this has been put in place, harmonized rolling stock, harmonized timetables, and of course, open markets across the borders, then I think rail can play the role that we all like it to play. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian. Real Pro has answered the question in the end with a lot of diversions before that, covering a lot of interesting and relevant topics here. I'll hand over to Dariusz Kausa from SNCF Réseau, where he's the president for Europe, so the French infrastructure manager. From this more national perspective, we've heard about that we need a shift from national planning to European planning. We need a bigger prioritization, both in our mindsets, as Jakob Dalunde pointed out, and in the missing links across the border to make cross-European border traffic possible. How do you imagine, from this perspective of an infrastructure manager, how the rail system will look like in 2035, and what is, from your perspective, the most needed steps towards that? Still muted, so I think we That would be great.
Just let me share one slide with you right here. It will take half a second, because I would like to bring some optimism in all of this and say that this is a map that concerns France and its neighboring countries only. And you see how with the high-speed development of the high-speed lines, how the geography of this part of Europe has changed. And this I only put in to say that once the infrastructure is in place and there is a reasonable degree of cooperation between infrastructure managers and the timetabling is done as it should be done in a coordinated manner, be it national or international, well, it is possible, because we have in the railway world success stories like London, Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam. And the second thing I'd like to share with you is this, which shows how once you've offered a proper service, the railways, I believe this is Paris, Lyon, Milan, Rome, and Madrid, Barcelona, have 80% of the share as compared to the airlines. So there are possibilities and things that can be done. And this is not to downplay the difficulties we're all facing. I like what Christian Smith said about manual, annual, and national for the timetable, because we are working on a project to improve the coordination and timetabling in Europe. And that is a paramount issue, because that will make a difference with what John Worth showed earlier and what happens today across many borders. Thank you, John. That was very interesting. And of course, we have an issue of the mindset, starting with the infrastructure manager, to imagine our world as more international, even though the masses of the volumes and the masses of the funding are today strictly national. How I see 2035 is simple, that we are halfway through our journey to a decarbonated transport in Europe, and that this has happened with a significant modal shift, because we're not decarbonating transport does not mean that it's all going to increase all over the picture, but that some of it will shift from less sustainable to more sustainable modes. So this is where we will stand in 2035. Now, the truth is that when you are, all those who are engaged in this should also know that this is not an easy path. This is a very, very steep path, because of the way the railways are technical, very physical, very embedded, and very historical. You don't change them the way you change an iPhone or a t-shirt. So we need to work now for the railways to improve 15 years later. We need to invest now for the network to be ready 15 years later. So there definitely needs to be some extra regulation, no over-regulation, but some extra regulation that we're looking forward to help us cooperate. And we also need massive funding, and this is a political choice, and it must be done now. I would like to say that the COVID crisis has proved that the railways are, first of all, a factor of resilience in our economy. There was a Norwegian example, but I'll bring another example. 80% of the fundamental freight trains have traveled in Europe during the COVID, also through thanks to specific regulation put in by the Commission. And this meant that we missed nothing, except for freedom, of course, during the COVID year in our homes, in our markets, and in these places. So rail is resilient. The COVID crisis also proved that our continent is very wealthy, very prosperous. It may not be true in 20 years. And as the climate crisis unfolds, 20 years, in 20 years, in 10 years, it will be late to decide. We have to decide now, and we have to invest now, and then the rest will follow.
Thank you very much, Dariusz. And you've pointed out also an interesting point that the funding is also very much national so far, and we need to think beyond that to grow the European share of rail. And there are two questions. Stefan Rosianu, from the president from the Romanian Railway Reform Authority, an authority which already carries its task in its name, a rare example, but very explicit, which is nice. And there are two questions that I would like to point out when handing over to you from the audience here. They both go into the direction, how will the European Commission make sure that the timetable coordination will be European, digital, and flexible, as even legislation so far has not been implemented properly? And could the European Union take the role of a competent authority for cross-border rail services? And the question to you, coming from a European member state, is like, how can member states support this shift to a stronger and better European coordination. How, in your perspective, will this look like in 2035? The play together with the European level and the national level.
Yeah, good morning to everybody, and thank you for inviting me here. First of all, I'm pretty sure that railways in any format will play a key role even during the next decade and the others, because we know very well that the advantages for mass transport are unquestionable. So the only question is how we manage to capture as many people as possible and to contribute to fighting climate change effects. Cross-border transport is essential if we want to build a real European Union. And I think besides one-to-one cooperation between member states, indeed an integrated vision and some general rules are important also for building long-distance cross-border services. At this moment, as we know, there is a big difference in vision. What means public service obligations? What should be the scope of them? Because a key topic earlier in our discussion was around night trains. We remember that some night trains are still in the middle of European debates. Should they be subsidized or not? Should they be part of public service contracts and so on? It is not easy. Somebody has to pay if we want to reduce pollution, and is not very easy all the time to ask users to pay the full price. So basically, such agreements should exist, and I'm pretty sure that in the next 10 years we will be more integrated. As rebuilding of infrastructure continues all around Europe. So despite pessimistic messages that in different areas of Europe, especially in East Europe, some construction sites are delayed. In the end, more and more lines are reliable and provide a better and predictable connectivity. Now it's the moment also to play on the soft measures, how we exchange, especially coaches from one country to another, how we build the services around the client. Is not always a tragedy if we have to change a locomotive in one place along the route. But when we are building the service, we need to see when should the train arrive in a specific specific city, what kind of value-added services can be provided in order to build enough reason to give up on private cars or on planes and to accept a long time, let's say a long time journey. In Romania, as we are in the eastern part of Europe, we are now preparing also the cooperation with Hungary and Bulgaria for cross-border public service contracts. And also, as another topic was high on the agenda lately around ticket selling and journey planners. we believe that indeed access to information is another key topic if we want to convince people to use railways. So, for example, our organization with this very nice name, including Reform, is about to deploy an important new ticketing system in Romania to provide access to also to remote villages, but on the other hand to provide integration with local public transport and also international or from other member state services in order that any person to be able to build their own system to organize their journey. Yeah. So we believe in interoperability, in integration and cooperation, and this I think will be or should be some keywords for the next period, and of course with the client in the middle of all policy.
Thank you, Stefan Rosiano, for that impression from the Romanian side and Eastern Europe. I see that Jakob Dalunde would like to reply on that, but maybe first I would like to hand over to Lorelei Limousin from Greenpeace Europe. She's campaigner there in the European section of Greenpeace. Maybe when handing over, I'd like to point out one thing. Stefan Rosiano pointed out the, let's say, ideological differences on PSOs and open market access and so on. And I would like to point out one very smart solution that I think has been developed by KCW, who are also present in the audience today, offering like a three-step approach, like giving the first round is being solved by open access, the open market. Those connections that are not being covered then will then be tendered in bundles with more attractive and less attractive connections, and those connections which are still not being covered but where we need a connection and there's a political will to engage a connection could be covered by PSOs. This is I think a very smart approach which gives the best of both worlds basically, or tries to combine that, and I would just like to inject that into the discussion and make that known a bit, which has been developed by KCW. Lorelei, from your perspective, you've probably very much inside the environmental limits that we have to achieve and the shift we need to get into the transport system until 2035 and the high speed we need to develop in our actions to get there. How would that look like from your perspective? What points would you like to pick up?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jakob, and good morning, everyone. Very happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So yeah, I'm happy to give you our vision for 2035. Maybe I'll start with where we are at today. So rail is the least polluting way to travel. We all know that. Kilometer for kilometers, cars are 4 times more polluting and planes are 5 times more. And yet only 7% of the passenger transport in the EU is by train. And also we are not all equal when it comes to traveling by train. Train tickets are too expensive for many people. Not all train stations are accessible for people with reduced mobility. So there are like really big challenges. And by 2035, that has to change. Trains must become much more accessible and much more affordable, of course, more convenient and comfortable as well. We believe rail should really become the most attractive and obvious option. And I'm sure, like I hear that we all agree on this, that we need rail to get people out of planes and cars. And we think that regional and long distance trains would have to be well connected with a European timetables that really make sense, as we've seen. We also think that night trains would replace the majority of short and medium flights, provide services for business travelers, but also students and families. And it's not only an ideal, it's really possible with the right legislation and investment. And it's also absolutely necessary to tackle the climate crisis, of course. So where to start? For the 2 steps in 2023, what we've seen this year, that the best way to increase the public transport use in the short term is this kind of subsidized and affordable climate tickets, as we've seen in Austria or Germany over the summer. So these climate tickets save energy, they save money for people in terms of the economic crisis, and also they save greenhouse gases emissions, and people really love them. So we think this is a very popular measure, and that it needs to be rolled out everywhere. And I wonder how the European Commission could help this dynamic as well. Also starting working on a European climate ticket for all Europeans. So this is something that we are really interested in. And secondly, I'm not the first one to say that this morning, but we really need to increase investment, public money, and also cooperation between member states and the European Commission to make sure we start opening and reopening new lines now. We've seen in the European Commission study, or the studies that the European Commission published last year at the same time as the action plan, that the number of routes actually declined in Europe in the last 2 decades. And we all want the demand to grow in the coming years. So we really need to act now, and that includes more investment and more cooperation.
Thank you, Lorelei, for that perspective. Finalizing the round of the perspective from our member states, I would like to hand over to Ralf Schweinsbeck. He is Director for Infrastructure Investments and the surrounding legislation at the German Ministry for Digital and Transport. And maybe you could cover again a bit this topic of how can we how can member states support this better European coordination? Especially when we look at, John has pointed out this example across the German-French border. I mean, the German initiative of the Trans-Europe Express 2.0, it does not always help when an initiative comes from Germany in Europe, but maybe sometimes it can be picked up. How could this become a European initiative, and how can the German government support this better European coordination?
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. First, I want to answer your original question. What I wish to have in the next 20, 30 years for Europe. I want to travel from a point A to a point B with different transport modes, if necessary, but with a very strong and perfect single European railway market in this transportation. So our aim is, from German point of view, to have this single European transport market. And the other question, I want to raise 3 topics. First, legally, second, a process topic, and the third one is to give you some examples we have done. I heard from speaker before, we have done in the summer, and we have doing since 5 years, because this answers some of the questions which are raised. Legally, what we need from my point of view is, and that solves in 2 directions a lot of questions. We need a legally binding anchor for the railway system in the law. This could help us for the one point to get the budget we need for the investments, especially if we have to find a decision between infrastructure for road, for air, for railways. This is helpful to have this. Secondly, this could also be helpful in the planning approval, because we have one big problem in the railway system in Europe. We are too slow with the implementation. We have now discussed in 10, 15 years interoperability. We have find a lot of solutions for TSIs and so on. We have find a lot of solutions for national, for European-wide plans of ERTMS, freight corridors, and so on. But the implementation, we are too slow. Too slow for our climate protection initiatives. We have to solve this problem worldwide. So for implementation, it could be helpful if we have this legal anchor that the railway is a sustainable transport mode we have at the moment available in Europe. This could help in the planning approvals that you find a good assessment procedure to decide for the one or the other projects in a much more faster time. So we need this legally binding railway as a sustainable and climate protection by law. Secondly, the processes. As I told before, we are too slow. So we have an implementation problem, not a regulation problem. Once again, we wrote a lot of regulations in the last year, European-wide, German-wide, but the implementation, we are still too slow. One of the elements is a budget. The second element is a process. So we must do something to increase and to accelerate these processes. For example, if we look to big European-wide projects, for example, high-speed connection between big cities, there we need, from my point of view, a stricter and stronger coordination, moderation of the European Commission. For smaller links, for example, France, Germany, we heard this project, Strasbourg to Germany, I prefer to give more flexibility from the Commission to the member states. This can be solved, from my point of view, much more better by the member states and not by the commissions to use it in TEN-T projects, which is a very administrative burden. Then I want to come to two elements we have discussed in Germany in the summer and in the last 5 years, because this answers some of the questions which were raised. Firstly, we have implemented for June, July, August, a so-called €9 ticket for regional trains. This was a big success, and the people moved from other transport modes to the rail. One element was a very cheap price. This is could be never done a second time in Germany from our budget problems. But there are other elements. We are now in an evaluation process to these initiatives, and it shows that people, where we get the possibility to learn that rail is a transport mode which can be used, they also used other transport modes. So one of the results at the moment we see is that also for long distance trains, there are more customers who are using this, because we open the way for the people to this mode, to this railway mode. It's called, from one colleague before, we had to change the mind of the peoples. These are ideas and these are projects where we can find out that this is important. And therefore, I would like, what we need is, we need an attractive railway. Yes, pricing is an element. Attractive is also ticketing. This shows this ticketing was valid in whole Germany. If you travel now in Hamburg, you need another ticket if you travel in Munich, but this was valid for whole Germany. And this was one of the big benefits of such a ticket. So this shows we must make initiatives to show our people that railway is a good system. And this have also results to other railway initiatives like long distance. If the people see that with regional trains they can be perfect travel from A to B, they're using also and buying also for a higher price long distance trains. This is the first element. So we must find ways to change the mind of the people, to make initiatives that railway is a sustainable climate protection for the future, and then the people will use it. Second point, we have integrated since 5 years a national integrated regular interval timetable, the so-called Deutschlandtakt. We are using this element in 2 directions. The first direction is for finding the best investment in our infrastructure. Yes, and this is exactly a coordinated timetable between all transport modes. So we are looking what is necessary to fulfill the elements of freight trains, of regional trains, of long distance trains. Perhaps it's a good idea this is, I believe, too complex for Europe. But if we separated some elements, for example, for high-speed trains, this could be also a method for a European-wide integrated timetable, which is one of the elements we need also for the future.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Schweinsbeck. That's a very good point. This integrated European timetable. I mean, on the Deutschlandtakt, maybe we also have some not regulation but implementation problem there nationally, and I would like to pick up that point of a European integrated timetable. And hand that over to Christian Schmidt and Jakob Dalunde again from the European level. But before we do that, we have one more speaker from the, which hasn't contributed so far, from UNIFI, the European producers, Philippe Citron, who is the Director General at the Association of European Rail Producers. Philippe, from the industry point of view, like what political changes would you like to see to achieve that bigger modal shift to rail? Because it's also the historic obligation that we have to keep the climate limits is also, from your perspective, must also be a huge business opportunity. And it's one of the rare examples, I think, where environmental associations are in favor of growth, actually, here in this case. So what regulatory changes would you like to see to achieve that shift?
Thank you first for inviting me for this meeting. Thank you for your country. Just the title of this session was Making Cross-Border Rail Travel Fit for 55. And you know, the Fit for 55 regulation is a very important regulation because we have to reduce by 55% the CO2 emissions by 2030. So that's a big challenge for all the industry, but even if for the rail industry, you know that we are only emitting 0.5% of emissions, which is a very low percentage. For me, if you look at 2035, the first thing which is very important is to have sufficient funding to boost rolling stock and infrastructure investments. You know that there is quite a lot of money available. I would like to thank the Commission for the effort they made on this, because we have the National Recovery Funds with 55 billion euros, which has to be spent before 2026, which should not be the case. We have CEF, structural funds, so quite a lot of tools, which can financial tools, which are there, plus the EIB support, but it's a different way of financing a project. Then we have to be sure that there will be investment to attract private investment, and taxonomy will be also important. And I think that we can congratulate the Parliament for the support they are giving on the proposal made by the Commission on this revision of the TEN-Ts. I personally think that TEN-Ts is certainly one of the most important things which has been done by the Commission in past years. And of course, we need, but it's another issue, regulatory stability to support long-term investment. So the most important is to be sure that the investment will be there, and we know that investment will also be made at the national level. After that, interoperability is absolutely essential, and I listened carefully to what Christian Schmidt said on the role of ERA, on the necessity of harmonizing the rolling stock, but I think one of the most important things is to be sure that we will be able to meet the targets of 2040 for the deployment of ERTMS. Without ERTMS, you cannot improve the cross-border system, and we were quite happy to see that the ERTMS coordinator is a little bit optimistic about the situation we have now on the deployment of the ERTMS. And after that, there are two more things I would like to say. We have to be sure that there will be the promotion of a true level playing field. We heard Mr. Dalunde say the two words, mindset shift. I think we must be sure that there would be a model shift to rail with a true level playing field vis-à-vis other modes, but we'll not go into the debate, but it's absolutely essential that it would go in that direction. And then I would like to say that there are two initiatives which are important, the Fit for 55 initiative and the AFIR discussion. I would like to thank again the Parliament for this, as the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation, for the support they are giving to us on a new system like hydrogen trains, about battery power trains. When it's not possible to electrify the line, it's important to have those solutions for the development of the rail system. And I think that the revision of the state aid rules for railway undertakings will be certainly very important. Last thing I would like to say, because we always forget the specific point, which is absolutely essential for our sector. And if we look at 2035, it's the issue of skills. Today, there's an important staffers meeting, but if we don't solve this issue of skills, we will be in trouble. So we need to attract young people, women to the rail sector. This is absolutely essential. So I'm also rather optimistic. We see that there's a support from the Commission, the Parliament, the member state, but still, as it has been said by our German colleague, we need to be sure that the implementation of this would be a bit accelerated because things are going quite slowly in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippe, for that perspective. So the rail industry stands there ready to achieve the need for more trains. A colleague of mine who's also present, he calculated once that when we want to achieve that European goal of doubling high-speed passenger rail by 2030, we need approximately 1,000 additional trains. So we need to start building them now. Maybe picking up one more point, we've seen in the audience two reactions that show that the regional coordination between the member states does not always work so well. John pointed that out in his input, this example between Germany and France, and then we have one more example from the audience between France and Spain, and we had a lot of calls for European coordination. So one question to point out to Jakob Dalunde, and maybe Christian Schmidt, you also would like to react on that. How will the Commission, or I'll take it broader here, the EU also make sure that this scheduling will be digital, European, and flexible? How do you want to achieve that implementation? And maybe what do you need from the present players, the member states, the national infrastructure managers, to achieve that shift so that we actually get that implementation that Ralf Schweinsbeck was calling for? Jakob Dalunde, maybe I can address you first. You also wanted to raise a point before, and then Christian Schmidt.
Yes, so a couple of points. First, on the timetabling, it might be a too big a project to make all of timetabling decided from the European level. That might be an overreach. I think a better first step would be to look at the certain corridors. Let's say the corridor between Stockholm, Copenhagen, Hamburg, and then Hamburg, Köln, Paris, or Paris, Frankfurt, Berlin, and look at those corridors where a lot of people might make longer distance journeys cross-border, and make sure that the European level, either through the Commission, through the European Railway Agency, or a new body, gets a mandate to take the national timetablers in their ear and make sure that they coordinate along the corridors where the biggest faults are. Second point I would like to raise is coming back to night train rolling stock, because this is really a catch-22 moment, because I've talked to so many railway operators who would like to expand new night train lines, but it's such a big financial risk to buy rolling stock, because as you as an operator might only have one viable route, and if that route doesn't work, you've bought a lot of rolling stock, and maybe you will not be able to use it. And of course, you can sell it, but then another operator needs to make that financial discussion. And then you talk to manufacturers, because coming up with a new design costs a lot of money, and the manufacturers only want to make a new design if they get a large enough order, usually a much bigger order than just one route for a single operator. And I've also talked to some companies who are doing some pooling and leasing already, but for day trains. They are also interested in pooling and leasing night train rolling stock, but also for them, the risk is a bit too big. So here, I think it's really time for the European level, not for the Commission to run it itself, but to coordinate and make sure that you get all these actors together, and maybe with funding from the EIB, making sure that it's the it's the societal level that sees the need for more night trains and therefore take the financial risk and help the private companies de-risk that investment in more rolling stock and making that available for leasing for various European operators. And then a final point on whether it is easy or difficult to get political support for the railway sector. I think it's quite easy to get support in the resolutions in terms of, in general, being more supportive of more railways, both for domestic and for cross-border. The difficult thing is when you get down to the nitty-gritty, the regulation, the investments, the financial framework. In the previous mandate, we got fantastic language in the railway passenger rights from the European Parliament's position. When it comes to delays, we had bikes, but we also had some great language on ticketing. But too much of that died in the council, where we saw a railway nationalism. And here, the support from my colleagues was unfortunately very weak. So we need more politicians who will not only sign nice resolutions, but also fight and make sure that we tackle all those quite difficult and technical discussions where there are actually some losers, namely the aviation industry and to some extent some national authorities who would like to keep all the power in the regulation, in the timetables, in managing what language the locomotive operators have to or can speak, to make sure that the European level can take the reins and sort some of this mess out. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakob. Christian, do you want to reply to that question of how you want to make sure that this actually is achieved and maybe what support you need or where you see your mandate and your mandate's limit and maybe additional possibilities for that before you then get to a closing?
Well, thank you, Jakob. I mean, I a bit like Jakob Dalunde just said, talk is cheap. We all share the objective, but the devil is in the detail. And I'm encouraged by hearing member states, and also, for instance, we heard from Ralf Schweinsberg, what I understood to be sort of an increasing willingness to pool sovereignty and to set binding rules for what is necessary at European level. I accept that on timetabling and capacity management, it's certainly not necessary for us to go into regional connections and things like that. But just to be very specific, and I said we are working on the plans as we speak. So a proposal is being prepared for the second quarter of next year. But to give you a flavor of what we're looking at, there needs to be a much better upstream strategic phase. You need to look at what are the future priorities on passenger rail and on night trains, and there should be significant, separate segments in the timetabling for night trains. We're actually discussing with some of the infrastructure managers, how do you define night? There are different definitions of the duration of night and I can see Darius laughing because you know the discussion, Darius. Yeah? The night in Germany is not the same as the night in France. Okay, but let's agree on that. So at least we have the same charting segment for when it is night. So a better strategic upstream phase on what are the priorities and how, for instance, do we ensure that the difference of planning passenger rail, which is doable many years in advance, compared to freight, which is often, depending on market trends and demands, done a few months in advance. Once we have better coordination on that, then we need to set rules. We need to set the criteria for attributing priority. We need digital tools. We need coordination processes. And we need the setting of economic incentives. As you probably know, it's too easy to reserve a slot. And then if you don't use it, it's lost. I believe I'm right in saying that 40% of capacity on Europe's rails network is not being used. So before we spend billions and billions of money into new lines, which we should, we need better quality networks. But if 40% of the existing capacity is not used, fully exploited, John's trips around Europe has shown some of that. If that's not being used, clearly we must start with putting in place binding rules and procedures to make sure that that is used, and that implies setting binding economic incentives for the cross-border purposes, and then of course monitoring performance. Let me finish with a final word here on corridors, because I think we should be very careful not to come up again with an idea that hasn't worked. And that is to look at a specific corridor like we did for the rail freight corridors and believe that you can optimize and make everything work on a dedicated corridor or the 10T network. It hasn't worked for rail freight, because guess what? Most of our lines are mixed, and therefore, if you try to say we will coordinate only on a small part of the network, it simply will not work. So I do believe the infrastructure managers are ready for more binding European coordination and cooperation, and our proposal will go in that direction. Does it end up with a Eurocontrol for trains, where somebody at the center sits and directs trains across Europe? No, I don't think that's necessary. But I do believe that loose rules and principles are not enough. There needs to be binding rules for making that coordination work. Thank you. Back to you, Jakob.
Thank you, Christian, for that summary. And with that, I would hand over then to Darius, who you addressed already with the request to make it short before we hand over to Valentin.
Well, I will make it very short because Christian Schmidt had said it all, and thank you very much, Christian. And I fully support every word that has been said on the corridor approach and its limits, which have proven limits because the infrastructure is shared by different trains. You can't make regulations for a single subset. On the fact that we do need, and we are as a sector working on a capacity coordination process, and that involves incentives, that involves, and that will involve rules, priority rules, and other kinds of rules that we as a sector do welcome where they are needed. We don't need to have timetablers sitting in Brussels. We need to have some extra regulation at specific points for the system to be coordinatable, because it's legally not coordinatable today. And then, of course, the rest of the effort will be for the infrastructure managers to deliver what is expected from the market and from the RUs. I would also just like to add one more word, is that in all this story, there will be trade-offs, and the sector, the political world, and the general public has also to accept the fact that there are going to be trade-offs. The infrastructure will not improve without works. Works will take capacity for some time. It will be bumpy on the way to 235. That was our goal today. That has to be accepted. It has to be accepted that the trains, the railway system today, it's a commission study, pays more than its external costs. Other sectors don't, so there is no way train tickets can be like those at the price of those of certain airlines, because the level playing field is not a level one. So the trade-offs that will also have to be solved beyond the railway system in itself. Our part, of course, is to solve the quality of what is delivered by the railway system in itself, and all that was said today testifies to both the engagement of the actors in this, and also to many shortcomings that you have so brilliantly underlined, and for which I can but apologize for the part of the responsibility that comes to the infrastructure manager today. Thank you.
Thank you, Darius Corsa from SNCF Réseau. Well, I think for me, from this panel, what I take is that there's a lot of topics to be covered, and I think we've touched on a very broad array of those. My personal highlight would be maybe the European climate ticket. I was very skeptical before the German one was introduced, but it has actually moved a lot, and I see Ralf Schreinsberg smiling there. It has moved the discussion much more than I could have imagined before, and that could be a very nice move, this European climate ticket. And with this thought, I would like to thank all the panelists very much for being here today, and hand over to Valentin Desfontaines from Réseau Action Climat, where he's responsible for transport topics, for the not so easy task to show us his highlights of this discussion and closing the conference.
Thank you, Jacob, and good morning, everyone. So I'm Valentin Desfontaines, and as you say that I work at the Climate Action Network France, and indeed it's never an easy task to try to summarize the exchanges, but I do my best. And again, thanks to all the participants for the quality, I think, of the exchanges we've heard this morning. And I think the conference, this conference illustrates very well the objective of this European Rail Network to bring together most of the EU rail stakeholders in order to exchange views, as we've done this morning, about how rail can help us to achieve our climate objective and find ways, and it is the most important part maybe then of the mission, to find ways to foster this rail development through Europe. And so I hope you will all benefit from this discussion and leave the conference with new thoughts, ideas to go through this challenge of fostering rail development. From my side, maybe a few things that I'd like to highlight, new ideas or important ideas that I've heard and which in my way seems to be key in order to move forward. First one maybe is the need to align our infrastructure investment with our climate objectives. And this needs to be done at both EU and national level. I've heard that this alignment is key and that there is a big responsibility to do so, because the investment the investment choices that we are doing now will of course influence the way we travel through Europe during the next decades. And for one part, and I think it's very important to have this in mind, it will influence the way we manage not to reach our climate objective in 2030 and then in 2050. So aligning our climate, our investment in the transport sector with our climate objectives means, of course, and that was said at several times today, that we need more investment to regenerate and modernize the network, and that we also need to prioritize those climate-friendly investments. And then when we have already those well-maintained and modernized rail infrastructures, I've noted a list of issues that we have to quickly solve, and I've picked up 4 issues, and I will say them and then close the session because we are running out of time. But so the need for a level play field to propose affordable ticket that was said just before me, and that is crucial. Then the need for more offer, because and it was very well illustrated, sometimes we have the network but we need more offer. The need to coordinate this offer, to coordinate the timetable, and then the need to have access to the existing offer. I think it was very well illustrated by John, because sometimes we have an offer, but we don't know we have it, and that is problematic, of course, if you want to travel by train. And maybe one last point to conclude. While we're doing this, I think we have also to keep in mind that fostering rail development, this is also creating new job opportunities. And I think it was well illustrated this morning with the issue of the rolling stock for day and night train, which of course will create new jobs opportunities through Europe. So again, thanks for your participation. Thanks to the participants, thanks to the panelists, and thanks also to the audience. And maybe a special thank you to Germanwatch, who organized the conference. And Jacob, I've seen that you have unmuted your mic. If you want to say a last word, I give back the floor to you.
Only thank you very much for being here today, and let's move this forward together so we achieve this real modal shift to rail and our climate goals, especially in the transport sector. So the question to say goodbye now will be like, what are your next steps on the way to a significant increase of the modal share until 2035? What will you do tomorrow, or maybe even today? Have a good day. Thank you very much, and see you at the next conference or in person.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.
Bye.
Nice day on